In 1914, half of all the automobiles on planet Earth carried a single name stamped into their metal frames, Ford, and they were built in a massive factory complex along the Rouge River in Detroit, where workers earned $5 per day, more than double what any other manufacturer in America paid their employees, while the vehicles themselves sold for less than half the price that competing automakers charged, a combination of high wages and low prices that seemed economically impossible, yet was generating profits so enormous that the factory's owner had become one of the wealthiest men in the nation. 35 years earlier, that same man had been a 16-year-old boy standing on his father's farm in Dearborn, Michigan, staring at endless rows of crops that needed planting and harvesting, hating every moment of the agricultural labor his father expected him to perform for the rest of his life, owning nothing of value except a pocket watch his father had given him that he had taught himself to disassemble and rebuild in minutes by studying its delicate mechanical movements. The journey from that farm to that factory, from poverty to unimaginable wealth, from a world where transportation meant horses and trains to a world where ordinary working people could own their own automobiles, required 3 decades of failures and setbacks and reinventions that would have broken most men. But Henry Ford was not most men, and the story of how he transformed both himself and America reveals how a single, obsessive idea pursued with absolute determination can reshape civilization. Henry Ford was born on July 30th, 1863, on his father William Ford's farm in what would later become Dearborn, Michigan, the oldest of 6 children in a family where everyone lived and worked on land that William had cleared and cultivated with his own hands, expecting that his eldest son would eventually inherit the property and continue the family tradition of agricultural labor that stretched back generations. But from his earliest years, Henry demonstrated no interest whatsoever in the rhythms of farm life, the planting and harvesting and animal care that consumed every waking hour. And he later wrote that he never had any particular love for the farm, that it was his mother on the farm he loved, rather than the work itself. Henry's education ended after 8th grade, not because his family could not afford to send him to school, but because he preferred to learn on his own terms by taking apart and studying every piece of machinery he encountered, rather than sitting in classrooms memorizing information from books. At age 12, his father gave him a pocket watch as a gift, and within days, Henry had mastered the art of disassembling its intricate mechanisms and reassembling them perfectly, a skill he soon applied to the watches of friends and neighbors, gaining a reputation as the local watch repairman who could fix timepieces that other people had given up as broken beyond repair. When Henry was 13 years old, he encountered a steam engine for the first time during a school trip to a Detroit company, and the sight of that machine, a mechanical device that could generate power through controlled combustion and move itself without horses or human muscle, transformed his casual interest in machinery into an absolute obsession that would consume the rest of his life. He began building his own steam engines on the farm, and by age 15, he had constructed a working model, though his experimentation came to an abrupt halt when his mother Mary Ford died suddenly of illness, a loss that devastated Henry and intensified his hatred for the farm that now held too many painful memories of the one person there he had truly loved. Against his father's wishes, Henry Ford packed his belongings in 1879 at age 16 and left Dearborn for Detroit, a city that was rapidly transforming into an industrial center thanks to steam power and was hungry for young men who understood machinery and were willing to work long hours learning skilled trades. Henry found work at the Michigan Car Company Works, a streetcar manufacturing company but was fired after only 6 days for reasons that remain unclear in historical records. And after a period of unemployment, he secured an apprentice position at the James Flower and Brothers Machine Shop, where he earned $2.60 per week, wages that were insufficient to cover his rent and living expenses in the city. To make ends meet, Henry took a second job, working 6 hours every night and 6 days per week as a jeweler cleaning and repairing watches for $3 weekly, pulling together multiple jobs while still finding time to study and experiment with machinery whenever he had free hours. In 1882, when he turned 19, Henry returned to his father's farm in Michigan. Though he still hated agricultural work and did very little farming, instead spending most of his time playing with and experimenting on the machines his father had purchased, including a portable steam engine that had become common among farmers seeking to mechanize some of their labor. Henry became so skilled with this steam engine that a neighbor at his father's farm paid him $3 to operate the machine, and word of his mechanical abilities spread across the region until the district representative of the Westinghouse Engine Company from Schenectady, New York, heard about his talents and hired him to travel throughout southern Michigan, setting up and servicing Westinghouse steam tractor engines. In 1885, Henry met Clara Jane Bryant at a New Year's Eve party, and they became engaged the following year, with Henry's father giving his son 40 acres of land as a wedding gift, though Henry had no intention of turning the property into farmland despite his father's expectations. In 1891, Henry and Clara moved to a small apartment in Detroit, where Henry took a job as a night engineer for the Edison Illuminating Company, the city's largest electric company that was generating electricity for 1,000 homes using steam engines, a position for which Henry was more than qualified given his years of steam engine experience. His primary responsibility was to fix the engines whenever they broke down or developed faults. But when the machinery was running properly, he had significant free time, which he used to immerse himself in learning about electricity and how it worked, knowledge that would prove crucial for understanding the technology that was about to revolutionize transportation. Around this time, Henry came across a British magazine that described a new type of engine being produced in small quantities by a German engineer named Nicholas Otto, an internal combustion engine that was fundamentally different from steam engines because it performed all its combustion internally rather than requiring external boilers and 30 minutes of startup time. This gas engine was becoming popular in Europe, but few people in America had heard about it, and Henry was fortunate enough to find someone in Detroit who owned one of these rare machines, allowing him to study its operation and become fascinated by its potential despite not initially understanding how the electric spark ignition system worked. In 1893, Henry and Clara welcomed their first and only child, Edsel Bryant Ford, and just 3 months after his birth, Henry was promoted to chief engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company with a salary of $100 per week, a substantial sum that gave him financial security for the first time in his life. That same year, he succeeded in building his first working gas engine, a crude prototype that represented the first step toward his dream of creating a horseless carriage that ordinary people could own and operate. It was not until June 4th, 1896, at exactly 1:30 in the morning, that Henry finally completed his first experimental automobile in a small brick workshop behind his apartment, a vehicle he called the quadricycle because it essentially consisted of 2 bicycles placed side by side and powered by a gasoline engine that drove the rear wheels through a simple transmission. The machine worked, demonstrating that self-propelled transportation was possible, but it had significant problems, including only 2 forward gears with no reverse gear and no cooling system whatsoever. meaning the engine would overheat after running for even short distances. Henry made numerous modifications to address these issues, most importantly, adding a water cooling system, and he eventually sold the quadricycle for $200, using that money to fund his next project. With the support of Detroit's mayor, he began building a second experimental car that he completed in July 1899, a larger and sturdier vehicle that impressed a wealthy lumber merchant named William Murphy, enough that Murphy agreed to become Henry's financial backer. And on August 5, 1899, they formed the Detroit Automobile Company. The company failed within a year for multiple reasons that would teach Henry crucial lessons about manufacturing. First, Henry wanted to continue improving and perfecting his designs, while his investors wanted him to produce passenger cars they could sell immediately, creating fundamental disagreements about priorities and timelines. Second, and perhaps more importantly, most of the parts required to build the cars were produced by different suppliers, and whenever a delivery was delayed, the entire factory had to halt production and wait.
If every one of these workers could be saved 10 steps a day, thought Henry Ford, I could save 50 miles of wasted motion and misspent energy.
A dependency on external manufacturers that made consistent output impossible. The company's first vehicle, called the delivery wagon, took 6 months to build, and only 20 units were produced during the company's 2-year existence before Henry was fired by frustrated investors. Rather than viewing this failure as a defeat, Henry saw it as an opportunity to begin again, more intelligently, and he turned his attention to racing cars for a strategic reason that had nothing to do with sport. Racing had become enormously popular in the United States, and Henry recognized that winning high-profile races would give him a platform to showcase his engineering abilities and prove to potential investors that his designs were superior to competing vehicles, essential credibility after the Detroit Automobile Company's embarrassing collapse. In 1901, Ford's newly designed racing car defeated the vehicle of Cleveland automaker Alexander Winton, as well as the nation's leading racing driver at Grosse Pointe, and his 26-horsepower machine became the talk of Detroit's industrial community, giving investors the confidence to back him again. This led to the formation of a second company with Henry as chief engineer. But the same conflicts that had destroyed his first venture emerged again when investors grew frustrated that Henry continued working on racing cars rather than passenger vehicles they could sell to the masses. The investors brought in another engineer named Henry Martin Leland to take over production, and Ford, annoyed that they had replaced him, resigned from the company he had helped create, stating in his autobiography that he was determined never again to put himself under orders from investors who did not share his vision. Leland followed the investors' wishes and went on to create what would become known as Cadillac, while Ford's company was renamed the Cadillac Motor Company after his departure. Henry continued building racing cars with a former racing cyclist named Tom Cooper, and in 1902 they produced the Ford 999, an 80-horsepower machine driven by Barney Oldfield, a former bicycle racer who had never driven an automobile before but who managed to defeat Winton's car again. By 1904, Henry's newest racing car had broken all American speed records by reaching 91.4 miles per hour, establishing him as the nation's premier designer of racing automobiles and giving him the reputation he needed to attract investors for a third attempt at building a car company. With financial backing from 11 investors, particularly a coal dealer from Detroit named Alexander Young Malcolmson, Henry's third company came to life, initially called Ford and Malcolmson Limited, but later renamed the Ford Motor Company in 1903. Having failed twice before, Henry was determined not to fail again, and he made a crucial decision that would differentiate his approach from every other automaker in America, he would focus on creating vehicles that ordinary working people could afford, rather than luxury machines for the wealthy. At the company's founding, Henry made a statement to his associates and investors that revealed his revolutionary vision, declaring that he would build a motor car for the great multitude, constructed of the best materials by the best men to be hired, designed as simply as modern engineering could devise, and sold at a price low enough that any man making a good salary would be able to own one. This was not just an ambitious business plan, but a social philosophy that would transform American society by making personal transportation accessible to the middle class for the first time in history. Henry demonstrated a remarkable ability to identify and attract talented engineers who shared his vision, and over the next 5 years, he created more than 20 different automobile designs before developing the Model A, which he continuously improved through variations, including the Model N. But what really changed during these years was not the vehicle designs themselves, but the manufacturing process Henry was developing to build them more efficiently and affordably. One of the most important lessons Henry had learned from his failed businesses was that depending on multiple external suppliers for critical components created production delays that made consistent output impossible. So he found a machine shop in Detroit that could supply most of the parts he needed, giving him greater control over the manufacturing timeline. During a trip to Chicago, Henry witnessed the assembly line concept at a slaughterhouse where animal carcasses moved along a line while workers performed specialized tasks at fixed stations, and he immediately recognized that the same principle could be applied to automobile manufacturing, allowing cars to be built much faster than the traditional method of having workers move around a stationary vehicle performing all assembly tasks. In 1904, where he employed over 300 workers and began experimenting with assembly line techniques, and by 1906, the production of the Model N incorporated early versions of the assembly line that increased output by 5 times compared to traditional manufacturing methods.
The moving assembly line dramatically reduced the cost of production. Before, it had taken 12.5 hours to assemble a car.
Henry also built his own component manufacturing company in 1905 to produce engines, transmissions, and other critical parts, eliminating his dependence on external suppliers who had caused so many problems in his earlier ventures. Around this time, Henry discovered vanadium steel, a material that was approximately 3 times stronger than conventional steel while being significantly lighter. And this discovery enabled him to design a new automobile that would become the most successful car in history up to that point, the Model T. When the Model T was released in 1908 at $850, it quickly became a massive success, with 15,000 orders placed within days, demonstrating enormous demand for reliable automobiles at prices upper middle-class families could afford. Henry built a new plant in Highland Park, Michigan in 1910, where he perfected the assembly line system by 1913, implementing a process where vehicles were pulled down the line while workers remained at fixed stations, reducing build time from 12 hours to 90 minutes. By 1914, the factory was producing over 300,000 vehicles annually, more than all other American automakers combined. Between 1910 and 1916, annual Model T production increased from 20,000 to nearly 1 million units, and half of all automobiles on Earth were Fords. Henry reduced the Model T's price every year as volume increased, and by 1916, the car that originally sold for $850 was available for less than $400. Perhaps Henry's most revolutionary decision came in 1914, when he doubled workers' wages to $5 per day, a move other manufacturers ridiculed as financial suicide, but that reduced worker turnover dramatically, allowed Ford workers to afford the automobiles they built, enabled a third shift for 24-hour operations, and created what would become known as the American middle class. In 1919, Henry bought out all other investors, making himself sole owner of Ford Motor Company and giving himself absolute control over all decisions.
With employees trained to do just one, it meant craftsmen could be replaced by low-skilled workers.
He made his son Edsel company president, though Henry continued making all major decisions himself. And his refusal to listen when executives warned that consumer preferences were changing would cost the company its dominance. Henry stubbornly believed the Model T was the only car people wanted, ignoring the growing popularity of more stylish vehicles like Chevrolet, and by the late 1920s, declining sales forced him to shut down the Model T line and design the Model A, released in 1927. But Ford's one-man control was no longer the formula for success, and by 1936, the company had fallen to third place, behind General Motors and Chrysler. The Great Depression forced Ford to lay off workers and reduce wages, and in 1943, Edsel died of stomach cancer. Henry ran the company 2 more years before turning control to his grandson Henry Ford II, retiring to his estate where he died of cerebral hemorrhage on April 7, 1947, at age 83. The transformation Henry Ford accomplished extended far beyond automobiles, fundamentally changing American manufacturing through the assembly line, creating the modern middle class by demonstrating that high wages could be compatible with high profits and proving that mass production of affordable goods could generate enormous wealth while raising living standards for ordinary workers. Today, Ford Motor Company maintains a market capitalization of approximately $70 billion, a testament to the revolutionary vision of the farm boy who hated agriculture but loved machinery and refused to accept that transportation should remain the exclusive privilege of the wealthy. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more history content covering wars, revolutions, and events that shaped the modern world.